Welcome back, Cloud Cadets. In this mission, we're going to create a function app locally using Visual Studio. And we're going to use the Chuck Norris API. And yes, I know what you're thinking. I'm running out of ideas. That is only partially true. The primary reason I'm using the Chuck Norris API again is because I want this to be relatable to the Logic app, to keep things simple. Let's not get confused by complexity. Let's stick to what's different from a functions app relative to a Logic app, and how this process will take place when we compare it in other videos where we use Visual Studio Code or, for example, JetBrains Rider. Now, let's first minimize this browser. We don't need it right now. Let's open Visual Studio. Now, you might have used Visual Studio for other reasons, like creating a console app, Blazor app, anything, and you might not have installed what is required for an Azure function. So we'll click on this continue without code here. We'll go to Tools and click the Get Tools and Features. And here we will see different workloads that we can install for different kinds of developments. Like we see ASP.NET Web development, Python development, cross-platform with .NET, MAUI here. What we're interested in is this one, Azure Development Workload. Now I have it installed, but if I wish to simulate it, if I clicked it, like here, you would press this Modify button. And this would install what is required to create Azure functions. Once that is complete, you could technically go to File, create a new project here, but I want to illustrate this from the beginning to be inclusive to people of all backgrounds. And here we create a new project. And now this might look very different for you, especially this recent project templates. And we can filter quite a lot here, but things like functions are very difficult to find. For me, I've only set C# here, and I've not selected anything for all platforms. And I will search for functions here, and we see it here. Once you've created this project with like an Azure function and you return here, you will see it here in the recent, and you'll be able to pin it if you're gonna keep developing functions, if you like, as I have here. So I'll press here, go next. I'll give it a terrible name because we don't want to get confused. I just call it the function app and leave that. And here we leave mostly everything default, but we get a function with the project when we start. So the default one I'll want is HTTP trigger. And I'm not getting better in saying HTTP. Don't hold it against me. So we'll stick with that, and you see we have quite a lot of options. And for the authorization level, we're gonna set it to anonymous, which kind of like the best of both worlds. We just keep it simple for us now. Function would give us the best of those two, but we only want this because it needs to be accessible to everyone else. And everything else remains the same. Here, we could have selected different kinds, but we will stick to .NET 8 isolated, long-term support, as we discussed in the briefing. We'll click Create. And the first thing we see, let's not get confused first by this code right now. Let's look here to the left. We have quite a lot of files. We're only going to focus on two things here, the program.cs and the function1.cs, the default function we got when we chose the HTTP trigger. The program.cs just runs this function app, and then it can have a lot of different functions, as we'll see soon. We can make some configurations here, like dependency injection, logging, read, everything's possible here. But we don't care about that right now. We go to the function1.cs, and we see they use the old namespace system, which I think is a bit, it just clutters it. So I'll write CMac here, and it automatically does this for me. And now it's easier to read. We don't need to focus on 3 levels of brackets. Now let's take a look at it. We have a name called function1. We're injecting a iLogger with this name, and you see they're logging something when it is being run. and then it returns a response, and they use something called an OK object result. And we can now simulate this without deploying it on Azure. Pressing the play button here, you can run it locally, test it, make sure it works before we attempt to destroy Azure. And we see here functions. Function 1, the terrible name, accepts get and post, as we saw it did here. Get and post. And the authorization level was anonymous. And we can copy this link. We can open the browser. And we see welcome to Azure Functions. So it works. Great. Let's get back here. Let's close this. So our mission is to create a, we're going to use the Chuck Norris API. First thing first, we don't care about the post request. We only want to get. Second, we want a better name because this is just horrible. Let's call it, let's press Ctrl+R. For you, it might have been right click here. Quick action, no, not even that. You just need to click rename here. But you see, I can click Ctrl+R twice and we can rename. And I'll call it Chuck Norris API function. And it renames it even in the file. And doesn't rename it there, so we can copy that, paste it. Okay. We're going to make a request that returns a response, a JSON response. There are a few things that we need to do because we're going to do this asynchronously. We need to add async here. And we're going to need the task keyword. And instead of the iAction result, we're going to return something called a HTTP response data. And I can press tab here and it automatically imports it. We can remove this entire thing. We don't care about login right now. First, we'll need to create a client. Our client, new HTTP client. Thank you, AI. You know what I'm thinking. And here, oh wow, it even knows that link for the Chuck Norris API. But we're gonna do this step by step because we don't want to skip a thing. We'll search for the Chuck Norris API, which you have it there. We'll go in here. We copy this URL because remember, if I open this, we get some JSON data, and we get here the value, the joke that we're interested of. So let's go back to Visual Studio, and now we can actually use that, but I want to take it slow. Let's do it. I'm going to call it API response because we're going to use more than one response here. We do await client get async, and here we'll paste in that URL, close that off. We're done there. Firstly, we have to check once we have awaited, we've made the request to this API and we've awaited the response. First, we'll do, oh wow. We'll first do this response. If it's not an API response, it is a successful status code. We want to get that error. We're going to create a response of our own. And you see here, we have access to the request that came into our function. And from it, we're going to create a response that we wish to return. And here we can use built-in HTTP static codes. We could have just said 500, which is the internal server, but we like our code readable. So there we have internal server, and we return that. We do an await error. Write string async, and here let's say, oh well, thank you, that works too. And then we return error. See, where am I getting this error from? Rec is not null here. All right. We also need to modify this HTTP request data. There we go. We're happy. Are you? Ah, because we haven't returned anything. If we go to this point, it worked. We got the response from the Chuck Norris API. Now let's get the content. We'll await the API response. Oh, really can't write today. Content read as string async. We basically transform that JSON body to a string because we're not interested in the entire body. If we take a look here again, we don't care about most of this. We only want the value. So if we go back here, we're going to create what we call a domain transfer object, something temporary just for a simple use case. I'll create a private class Chuck Norris joke. And I'll create a property. So if I write prop here and then tab, now we see my marker is on the type. I will change it to string. I'll press tab again and twice. And now we're moved to the name. And I'll name it value. And just to get rid of this grid, this is not necessary, but we'll write required here. Now, when we're going to parse this, it will be case sensitive. So it will expect it to be value. But we saw here that is a small v, not uppercase v. So what we can do here, we can add a data annotation called JSON property name. And we can tab and automatically import it. And here we can customize what it will be. And we specify it to be value, the small v. And now it will work. Had we not done that, it would have failed the parsing. And now we come to the parsing itself. And here we will say var joke. We'll say, maybe this can get confusing because we see JSON there and joke data. So we'll just say joke data to make it more easier for eyes to differentiate between the two. And here we'll say JSON serializer. I'll tab, hopefully imported that as well, deserialize. And you see here we will specify what it will be deserialized into. And here I will set it to Chuck Norris joke. And then we need to pass in what needs to be deserialized, and it's the JSON. Voila, complete. Now we need to create a response to return to whoever sent the request to our function app. And that is why I called that first part the API response there, because I want to use the response again. It's explicit. But it's now the main response, not that API response. And here we're back to this rec. The request, to be honest, probably should call it request. Create response. You see here everything worked out. If we got to this part, and we can now use the enumeration OK, which is 200. And we can now await response, write string to this response. We're writing our joke data. And remember that it might not have worked. We might have not found anything. So we need to check if it's not null. And we put dot value here. And here, if it is null, we need to have a fallback plan. So therefore, we use the null coalesce operator. And say, if it was null, send back this string instead. We didn't find any joke. And then we can return the response. And now, just to make my life easier, let's see if we can rename this to request. So our code is more explicit. And now, let's try this. Let's run it. Hopefully this works. If not, I blame somebody else. Let's see. Let's click. Let's copy this. And let's go here. It worked. I did not expect that. Chuck Norris can FedEx a choking. Let's run it again. Great. This works. Now we have developed this locally with Visual Studio. We'll eventually do this with VS Code and with Rider once everyone has been included, because not everyone is a big fan of Visual Studio or can use it because they're not on a Windows machine. We will move to the next machine where we actually deploy this to Azure. Until next time, Cloud Cadets, Godspeed.